Okay. So, to everyone there, I want to say welcome to the first episode of Power to the Fans, the podcast where we explore the intersection of football culture and the people who make the game great, its fans. I'm Luis from Nordensa,
I'm
and today,
Danny.
and this is Mads. And today we're diving into the future of football with someone who brings an unparalleled 360-degree perspective on the football industry. Mads Davidsen, the head of football at the Right to Dream group. And briefly introducing Mads. Mads began his journey in football as a youth coach in his home country of Denmark, and since then, he's worked his way up to becoming a sporting director with a wealth of experience across the globe. Known primarily as a football strategist, Matt's work spans a wide range of crucial areas within clubs, including defining game philosophies, talent recruitment, and player development. He's also an author and a keynote speaker, and I'm excited to explore his insights on these topics today. But before we get into those big ideas, let's take a step back, look at the game through a more personal lens. So, my first question to Mats. Hi, Mats. uh, what's one fan moment from your childhood that reminds you why this game is so special? Um, was there a particular match, team, or player that sparked your love for football?
Yeah, first of all, good to be on board here, and looking forward to the conversation. It's a good question. I mean, the first thing I remember is that I was 3 years old, and my brother was 6 years old. And in Denmark at that time, you were supposed to be, I think, 5 to 6 before you could start playing like in a real club. And the thing was that my father was the coach of my brother's team, so I was always there with them, desperate to join in the pitch, probably every single day asking, "Can I join? Can I join today? Can I possibly join?" And then one time, finally, my father probably got tired of my questions, so he said, "Okay, you can join." And eventually, I was allowed to play a game. So I was playing with kids 2, 3 years older than me, and my first, basically, I was subbed in, and the story from my mother and my grandfather is that the shirt went all the way down my legs because it was way too big. And they were thinking, how is this going to go? Because he's so small compared to the other ones. And then, coincidentally, the first action I'm into is a ball lying just between me and the biggest kid on the other team. So we start to run towards the ball, and everyone can see it's going to be a clash. And we tackle, and the big kid, he just falls over. So I suppose it was a good start to if if you believe that you need to have some kind of success for gaining more motivation for doing stuff. That was kind of my first action in football, to win a tackle. So that's kind of my first my first memory.
Well, that's a good one and a very early one from your childhood. So, you were very young, like 3 years old, and you can remember going for a tackle with a big kid. Well, that's a good way to start.
That's a core memory built in there, right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's early, but I also have pictures. I can't remember it so clearly myself, but I have pictures when I'm 2.5, 3 when I sleep. I'm sleeping under my blanket with a ball. So I suppose it's always been pretty close to my heart, the game.
So now, after spending so many years within the football industry, how do you feel that your perspective as a fan has evolved? That's been so close to the inner workings of the game, changed the way you consume or enjoy football, or what do you find yourself appreciating or perhaps missing most as a football fan?
There's no doubt that I struggle to answer that question because I sometimes say I'm destroyed by being in the industry because you get kind of a tunnel vision and you start to see the game in a different way. I forgot to be a fan, to be honest. I'm not, for example, I'm not a fan of any team anymore like I was when I was a kid growing up because you start to take more in that the game becomes your fan of the game. You're not a fan of a team or of a player. So in that perspective, I'm probably not a great representative for the spectators or the fans of the game. But obviously one element that I can also see from my chair, I can hear from my network, or I can read in articles, of course, that there's probably today is a too big of a distance between fans or spectators, observers of the game, and the game, or the people playing the game or leading the game. That we have in now I say in England, it could also be in other countries, but for example in England, where big fences around a training ground, and almost like barbed wire around the walls, almost like it's becoming like a secret lab. And you see the only chance the fans have to see the players is when they, with dark windows, are driving fast away from the castle, so to speak, the training ground. And that's probably, if you go back to the origin, was not the point of the game. The other thing is, historically, if you look at football or football clubs, they were not necessarily set up as a revenue income provider. That football clubs were actually set up to provide some kind of gathering for the social event in a community or in a city, and kind of in sometimes replacing, at least this is the history also from Denmark, like replacing churches with what churches were many 100 years ago, where people would gather on Sundays in a church, and suddenly the communities found out that well, people are not going so much to church anymore. So where can we gather? So they built these clubs. That's why in Denmark, for example, you have, no matter how small a city you go to, there's a club, there's pitches, open communities to use to go into. So I think this part is also, of course, as the industry has evolved, maybe not the purpose of the game, if you can say that people are seeing it as just like you're seeing the stock market. You want to invest, or you're investing in a house, and you believe 5 years later you can sell the house for more. The same way we see investors now going into football to see it actually as providing a return of investment. That's in the historic moment was not the purpose of a football club.
I recently came across a fascinating statement in Optima Football's website, your consulting project platform, that claims that 75% of football clubs are strategically unhealthy. And that's a staggering figure. Can you explain what it means for a club to be strategically unhealthy?
Yeah, and that number is probably even a little bit conservative. I would say if we could probably have pushed it to more. But what we did was we did a kind of a market analysis. So we took the 5 best leagues in well, some would say in the world, but let's just say in Europe. So England, Italy, Germany, France, Spain, and then we took some randomly other leagues just to have a different benchmark. And then we looked at a club's way of working throughout a 3-year period. So, for example, how did their style of play evolve? Was it the same style of play? Did they change style of play after every window, for example? Did they change a lot of players? Were there any homegrown players coming up, depending on obviously the vision of the club? And then more interestingly, when the head coach was fired, what did the club do? Did they continue, or did they change everything? And that's basically what it means. It means that 75% of the clubs, they changed strategy when they changed head coach. So style of play would change, big turnover in the squad. So we all know what will happen. The head coach and probably 5-6 other people would be fired. A new head coach would come in. He would bring 5-6 new people. They would say, now we play in a different way. So these 5 players we cannot use anymore, but we need these 5 from our old club instead. And then the club would do that. And then statistically, 14 to 16 months later, they would also sack that coach. And then they would hire a new head coach, and he would once again say, I'm going to play in a different way. So that's what we mean about being strategic unhealthy, that actually the strategy, we call it the keys to the club, but the strategy belongs to the head coach, a person that you statistically change every 16 months. This is FIFA statistics. It's actually, I heard it's even less now. This research was done some years ago. I think it's down to 14 months now that a head coach averagely sit in the job. So for us, was just a little bit insane that you give the keys to the club, the strategy to the club, to one person, and then you change him averagely every year and 2 months, and then you go again. So it's kind of I see a little bit like, if you use the analogy of a computer, it's almost like you constantly buy a new Mac. So the hardware is good, but you keep using Microsoft Windows 1998. So we can all imagine that computer is probably going to have a very slow software. And then we try to update it every 12, 14 months, but we keep using Microsoft 1998. We don't change the software. So that's kind of the unhealthy part of the industry.
Okay. Isn't it a little bit paradoxical that with, as you mentioned before, a lot of private equity coming into football, a lot of private investors trying to acquire clubs, develop clubs, and then the clubs have no strategy. After 14 months in the job, the coach gets sacked, and all the strategy goes down to the well. It's something that you imagine that's going to change with this new with the changes in club ownership.
You can always hope, of course. That's also why we wrote the football strategic book, How Hard Can It Be? Because that's kind of our ambition with the book, to show the football industry that it's not necessarily been very sustainable, but there is a way out of it. Unfortunately, I think that many of the ownership or the investors coming in don't know the industry deep enough, and therefore they will kind of make some of the same mistakes as others. And there's a historic logic to why they all use what we call the unhealthy model. That's the model I just described, with giving the head coach basically the keys. It's, if you go back to the 1990s, a head coach would averagely be in the job more than 3 years. So that's what you could argue was continuity. And therefore, in some way, it could make sense that the head coach had the keys, because if he was there for more than 3 years, and in the best examples like Alex Ferguson or Arsene Wenger, plus 10, 15 years, then of course it works. That model can be sustainable. But when after the Premier League was introduced and the money went up, then the coach length at the same time went down. It's like we keep using that model from before in a new setup where it doesn't fit anymore. So I think it's historically that people just from outside assume that this is the way football is supposed to be run. And then I think a big part of some of the ownership that I've worked with and for, they miss the quite crucial detail that football, the tool in football is human beings, which basically no other industries can argue that what they're producing is is human beings. That human beings have obviously feelings. We have blood running through our veins, and therefore it can have a big impact. Some things that also is out of your control, in terms of that the striker's grandmother got sick the day before the game, and that's why he's not performing, for example. That you will not face in many other industries. So that part as well is, I think, sometimes difficult for the investors or the owners to understand what is the core element of the industry.
If we, I think we can talk about talent recruitment, which is something that you're also very passionate about and very heavily involved in. So, we live in a world now where data and analytics play an increasingly significant role in football. So how do you strike the right balance between scouting players based on numbers and identifying the sort of intangible or latent qualities like mentality, character? These can't always be measured by data. And what kind of trends do you see shaping the future of talent recruitment?
Overall, it's very difficult to use data to scout talent or youth players, because not much data exists. they need to kind of play at a close to senior or first team level before you actually have data. So that's the first part that makes that difficult. But we, for example, in Right to Dream, where I am now, we say that we're not data driven. I don't believe in those words, but we say we are information driven. Because imagine that you have to buy a car or you have to buy a house. Wouldn't you want as much information as possible before you make your decision? I think we can all kind of agree that's pretty logical. And the same goes for the player. Why won't we have as much information, whether it's data or it's subjective or objective information? Why not bring it all to the table and then we make our decision based on that? So we try to gather as much information as possible, and then we challenge the kind of, let's say, standard difference in opinion in terms of people say that data is objective, and they say kind of, if you talk scouting, that the eyes is the subjective part, where we say, well, I actually think a trained eye is also objective, because if that person has watched 1,000 players, it's the same as the algorithm has watched 1,000 players. He has some kind of benchmark in his personal opinion, and therefore we can also argue that his opinion should have just as much value as the data, where we sometimes tend to think that the data is smarter than the person, but we would value both equally. So that's pretty much how I see it. The more information we can have before we make a decision, I'm sure the smarter the decision will be.
And connecting this with the previous answer on the approach to clubs and the strategy, when you were talking about the short term that coaches have right now, for example, how can clubs ensure that they're producing, because these are obviously long-term projects, how can they ensure that they're producing well-rounded individuals and not just athletes? And do you think that clubs generally care about, in this day and age, about the players as individuals enough, or is it more about creating sort of soldiers to do the job on the pitch?
Yeah, that's of course very different compared to where you are, but for example, in Right to Dream, where we are, that's where I think we are a little bit of an outlier, and what I really personally enjoy by being part of this project, that we specifically articulate our kids as student athletes from the beginning, because first of all, that's what they are, and secondly, you never know. We have like a route for our kids that when they join us, they stay with us until the 16. We don't, like you traditionally would see in many academies, then one player's development go a little bit down and they change him. They say you're not good enough anymore. We pick someone else. We give them a promise that they are with us until 16, and then at 16 we sit down with the kid, the parent, if there's an agent involved, and we make kind of a pathway decision. So is it realistically you can be a professional football player? Is that what you want to try to achieve? Or you will become what we call the student pathway. So we have now in Right to Dream 55 kids on scholarships in the US that are using their football talent to get a free scholarship. And by that, of course, having a good education and can build a good foundation for their life going forward. So that's should probably be quite normal what I'm saying here, but it's actually not. We are getting a lot of recognition for that in Right to Dream, that we kind of take that responsibility, especially for the non-football, because obviously, as you can imagine, if we go back to as a business case, there's not a lot of revenue of sending a kid into a scholarship, and but that's the model, and that's what the ownership and the board are very committed to. So of course we hope to inspire a football world that to take more responsibility and kind of guide the kids through instead of changing them because suddenly the one we once are not developing as hoped. Then you're just sending a kid out. I still think it's probably better than it was 10, 15 years ago, where I would say, more cynical, where the big clubs would take in 15 players and they would be happy if just one made it. and maybe even in their articulation kind of promise too much, that saying to all 15 of them, we think you'll be a pro player, where we all know the statistics are saying the exact opposite. But it's just saying to them, well, there's different pathways for you. We also have our former student athletes, a lot of them now we try to bring back. So, for example, if they're done with their education or done with their football, we try to get them back in the organization. We have one, for example, in as a hiring around one of our academies into either as a coaching role or administrative role and so on. So why not see it as a journey throughout life to help these kids and connect with them? Because of course it's not just a help; they also give you a lot back. You learn a lot from them and their journey as well.
Okay, good. I think that's really an outlier of what you guys are doing, and I think that Right to Dream deserves all the recognition it is receiving from the football community, and I hope that the football community, the football industry as a whole, learns with Right to Dream example and actually follows that trend. I think that in a world of football that is also changing due to some of the things that we already discussed here, like data analytics, virtual reality, AI, and everything. And you mentioned something very beautiful. At least I consider it that way at the beginning, when football pitches kind of replaced churches, when people gather together on Sunday and spend some time together. That connectedness, which is a basic human need, let's call it that way. How do you think that can we improve that connectedness in the years to come? Do you have any hint on that? I would like to hear from your experience, from what you experience.
Yeah, it's of course not easy, but of course to basically open the doors is one start. I still think, for example, Danish football is pretty unique still in that way that you can, at least most clubs, you can walk, if you're a fan, you can walk straight in and watch the first team trainings. There's no gates, there's no guards, there's no security, and that's pretty unique. I remember when Danny Lager, for example, was coming back to Brøndby from Liverpool after many years there, he was kind of I think he forgot what Danish football was like, because he was shocked, like, where's the guards? What can fans watch the training? And I mean that would be me. For me, I don't always understand what the clubs think is so secret, because what we say, for example, in Right to Dream is, well, if you want to replicate us, first of all, we'll be proud if someone wants to do that. Secondly, if I'm taking my football competitive hat on, good luck. Because as soon as you catch up with us, we have moved on to the next level. So we don't believe in that logic that it's almost like a secret lab where you cannot share the ingredients. You know, why not? We have guests coming all the time in Right to Dream, and our policy is that the door is open and they can see anything they want. And also because the interesting thing is, of course, what you find out when you have many guests, that guests ask good questions. So sometimes we get challenged on something we thought we're doing smart, or something we're doing without really thinking more about it, that suddenly they ask questions. We're like, hey, that's actually something we need to improve, or something we need to work on. So we also get something back from being open. So that would be my simple advice, of course, to open the doors, to have more fan engagement around the clubs, and more connection. I think that's where, for example, in Denmark, of course, a sport like handball is very big. Denmark invented handball originally, so it's a Danish invention, and obviously a lot of kids are playing handball. But what they're pretty good at is they're extremely open, like they're extremely close to fans. They're extremely close to the kids. The kids almost like run in the pitch, halftime playing, during a professional game and after the game. So it gives that, at least that feeling of that it's a community. It is something that we can get inspired by, because I can speak to the the star players directly.
And I guess to wrap it up, because we've got about 3-4 minutes left with you. There's one final question that we wanted to ask you, and that's if you can leave our listeners with one piece of advice or inspiration about the future of football, whether it's for the fans, for players, or aspiring leaders in the industry, what would that piece of advice be?
It's obviously a big question. I mean, there's a lot of talks around these years, of course, of more fan engagement, and to a certain extent, I think it would be healthy to have also what we actually are doing a little bit in Danish football, that some clubs have fan representatives in the board. So not necessarily, I'm not always thinking from a football perspective, at least, that it's a good idea of fans owning a club, because, well, basically why a lot of clubs are poorly run is because of too much emotion and too many emotional decisions. So, and fans are obviously emotional. That's the strength of their commitment. But if you have a fan representative in your board, at least you always have the voice of your spectators and the voice of your key interest people around the club. And sometimes us, and I of course point the finger at myself here as well, we have to remember why we are here. I sometimes, when I was a sport director, I said it to players, when, for example, players would, let's say after a loss, players would, we asked them to go out to do a media interview, they're like, no, I don't want to do that, and I'm annoyed. And I was like, then I sometimes, like I said, let's just go through the value chain here, why you are here, why you're earning money. Well, if you go through that chain, it all starts with the fans, because if there's no fans, if there's no interest in watching the games, then none of us has a job. And none of us gets salary from doing something we find very interesting doing. So you sometimes have to remind yourself that we are custodians for that people want to watch football and pay money to watch football, either online or live in the stadium. Therefore, it is our duty in some way to give something back, because otherwise, why should they continue? And that will, of course, that's kind of a first way to destroy the ecosystem, if you forget the main reason why we're all here.
Well, thank you very much for that answer and for your time today. I believe you have an away game today with the team that you're coaching.
Yeah, I'm definitely not coaching the team. That would be that would not be good for them. We have a much better coach here. But yeah, we are. I'm in Liverpool as we speak with our under 21 FC Nordsjælland Right to Dream team, where we play we invited to play in the Premier League International Cup. So we play Liverpool under 21 here tonight.
Fantastic. Well, good luck with that one. Sounds like it'd be a fun game and an excellent opportunity for your players. Luis, if you want to add anything.
No, I just want to thank Mads for the availability and for this, I would say, masterclass, an half an hour masterclass, where we went through some very important issues around what's happening with football nowadays. Yeah, and on my terms, a lot of food for thought. I hope the same for those who will listen to this podcast or assist to this podcast. And yeah, thank you once again, Mads. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Again, good luck tonight to your team.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and see you all soon, I guess. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.